Can these humble backyard cottages solve the housing crisis? No, they can't, not on their own. But accessory dwelling units, or ADUs as they're known, are one of the bright spots in the ongoing effort to build more housing and reduce housing costs. ADUs accounted for 20% of all new homes built here in California in 2023, and new laws are making them easier to build than ever. The entire West Coast has had success building ADUs, actually, but the small backyard homes have been slow to catch on in other parts of the US. It's about time for the rest of the country to join in. This video is all about the rise of ADUs. I'll talk about the benefits and drawbacks, their history, and the state and local legislation that make them all possible, after the bike bell. For those unfamiliar, ADUs are small secondary homes often built in backyards of single-family homes. In the past, they may have been referred to as an in-law unit or granny flat or backyard cottage or something like that. Today, ADU is the term that's become the standard. Every city and state has slightly different regulations about how large they can be, but they're generally smaller than the primary residence. Homeowners can build them and rent them out for additional income, or use them to house elderly parents or young adult children before they can find a larger home of their own. I do want to acknowledge that the idea that you might rent out some of your space or create a multi-generational household is nothing new. In fact, about half of America's rental housing stock consists of 1 to 4 unit small rental properties. Many rentals are managed by mom and pop landlords and not the major real estate firms and property managers that build and maintain glitzy high-rises and somewhat depressing suburban garden apartments. Multi-generational households aren't new either. One study of the children living in multi-generational households has found that the percentage has remained relatively stable since 1870, fluctuating between 5 and 10%. We're on an upswing right now, actually, approaching a historical high. The study I mentioned, which I linked to below, goes into some data-backed speculation about why, and you can read about it there. But the increased prevalence of multi-generational households has probably also helped fuel the rise of ADUs. It's nice to give each generation their own space, whether it be a grandparent or grown child returning and saving for a house of their own. Despite this history, for the vast majority of post-war America, most of the land area dedicated to housing was single-family only. No second units allowed. This is still true in places. But since 2000 or so, we saw a couple of shifts in the way people view their suburban houses. First off, large yards with perfectly manicured lawns started to be seen as wasteful. They took a lot of water and chemicals to maintain, hurt biodiversity in suburban areas, and took a lot of work to keep looking nice. By this point, many homes required 2 working people to afford, and maintaining the lawn was not something people had time or energy for. Second, the housing crisis really got rolling. After robust housing construction in the post-war years, a not in my backyard or NIMBY philosophy took hold and housing construction failed to keep up with demand, particularly in high-growth regions like the West Coast. When you limit supply but demand keeps growing, prices increase. Housing costs soared, putting homeownership out of reach for many. Many are also unable to afford any housing at all and are homeless. There are many facets and causes of the housing crisis, but that's the best summary you're going to get outside of a whole video dedicated to the history of the housing crisis, which honestly sounds like a pretty good video. Let me know in the comments if that's interesting to you. Perhaps unsurprisingly, Portland, Oregon was the epicenter of the early ADU movement. I say unsurprisingly because Portland is well known in the urban planning community for its progressive policies, particularly in the 1990s and 2000s. Portland invested in modern light rail and streetcar early and had the only directly elected regional government. And they built a really cool bridge where cars aren't allowed. Portland is also a haven for hipsters who pride themselves on doing things before they were cool. Portland got into ADUs before they were cool. Portland and nearly all of its nearby suburbs adopted policies to allow permitted ADUs back in 1997. I can't verify if this is the nation's first adopted ADU policy, but it was one of the most impactful of the era. Between 1997 and 2017, the city permitted nearly 2,500 ADUs, which is probably a majority of all permitted ADUs in the United States during that time period, because other cities simply didn't have a policy back then. Now, thus far, I've been talking about permitted ADUs, and there may have been unpermitted ADUs popping up around the country at the time. One study of real estate listings found from the 1990s to 2009 found that Portland likely had at least 3 times the number of unpermitted ADUs when compared to permitted ADUs. I'll talk more about permitting later in the video. In 2016, the ADU throne was passed from Portland to the state of California, who became the reigning queen of accessory dwelling units. They've not yet yielded the throne to anyone else. This is due to not one, but many incremental laws passed by the state of California to make it easier to build ADUs, easier than anywhere else in the country. The legislative record on this topic is instructional. It lays out a record of what works and what doesn't. The nice thing is that other states don't have to go through the long process of perfecting ADU laws. They can just take the end result and adopt that. The 2016 law, though imperfect, was still groundbreaking. It required local governments to allow ADUs on lots with existing homes, preempting any local bans. It also banned requirements that ADUs have their own pathways to the street and banned setback requirements for garages converted to ADUs. It also made ADU permitting by right. This is sometimes called ministerial review. It means that if a homeowner applies for an ADU permit that meets the standards of the local ordinance, it can be approved without having to go in front of the planning commission or city council. Those steps slow down the process and add a lot of uncertainty, making ADU construction less appealing. The law also reduced parking requirements for ADUs, which is good because adding a parking space for an ADU can also create a massive barrier. Finally, the law introduced the concept of a junior ADU, or JADU. These are ADUs built attached to the primary residence. The homeowner has to live in one of those units. But the JADU provides another way to add another unit, particularly on space-constrained lots. I guess I should apologize for all of this policy detail, but there's really no way around it. The devil is in the details, and the difference between a successful ADU policy and a flop can be something as small as a 5-foot setback or additional parking space. And I guess I should also apologize for making this so California-centric, but that's just where ADUs are being built these days. California learned this very lesson when they didn't see an immediate uptick in ADU construction. So the state legislature passed another ADU law the very next year. They allowed ADUs to be built as a part of new construction, not just within existing homes. Judging from the number of ADUs built in this neighborhood in my town, the option proved quite popular. I know that some people use them for guests or elderly relatives, while others do rent them out. The state found that local governments were prohibiting homeowners from renting out their ADUs separately. The state passed a 2017 law stopping cities from prohibiting that. As a side note, a lot of the state laws in California around housing are all about stopping local governments from thwarting the previous laws. It's like a cat and mouse game where a law is passed and the local government finds a way to evade it, and the state closes that loophole. The issue is that local governments believe in local control, but when it comes to housing, the local government wants to use its power not to build more housing, but to build less instead. It's like the whole states' rights thing, but at the local level, and unlike US states, local governments don't actually have power except for what the state legislature grants to them anyway. That's a long-winded introduction to the next set of state laws that came out in 2019. These were all about forcing local governments to allow for more ADU construction. The state prohibited local minimum lot size requirements and floor-to-area ratio requirements. Previously, a local government could say that you couldn't build an ADU on a smaller lot. The state government said, if it fits, you most certainly can. The state also capped setback requirements. If a local government was being sneaky, they could say that an ADU couldn't be built within 20 feet of a property line. But if your property is only 50 feet wide, you have to figure out how to fit an ADU into a 10-foot window right in the middle of the lot, which is obviously a big deterrent. But the state said no more. The state also prohibited any law requiring an owner occupy the ADU. The state also prohibited homeowner associations from restricting ADUs. This is a big deal because a growing share of homes are built in HOAs. Therefore, the state made sure to close a loophole that could have prevented a lot of new ADUs in those private communities. Furthermore, they granted the state's Department of Housing and Community Development the power to review any local ADU ordinances to make sure they comply with all of these state laws. My favorite part here is that the state didn't just make local governments comply with all the new rules, but the legislature passed a law requiring local governments to go out of their way to encourage new ADU construction. That's right, not only can they not restrict ADU construction, but they have to promote it too. Cities and counties have to include policies in their comprehensive plans that promote ADU construction. In subsequent years, they continue to refine laws around ADUs, but I'll stop boring you with the details. The point here is that it took the state chipping away the ADU issue over and over to finally unlock some of the potential out there. Luis Morante, a housing advocate at the Bay Area Council, put it really well. He said, to stop a project, you only need one red light, but to make a project go, you need at least 100 green lights. Each of these bills turns a red light green and makes it more likely for a homeowner to build an ADU. So what was the result? Well, the laws largely worked. ADU construction boomed in the state, and the boom's still booming to the present day. Just look at this chart. In 2016, California homeowners built 1,181 ADUs. In 2022, they built over 24,000. The only dip in this trend occurred in 2020, which is understandable. That's the year the game Animal Crossing came out on the Nintendo Switch, and everyone built tiny houses inside the game instead of out in their backyard. And I guess there was a pandemic too. All told, over 80,000 ADUs have been constructed between 2016 and 2022. During that time, the city of Los Angeles built 31% of the state's ADUs, despite only being home to 10% of the population. LA is officially the king of ADUs. Sorry, Portland. Portland is still winning in terms of the percentage of lots that have an ADU at 2.2%. LA has only 2.1%. I have to imagine that once we get to look at the 2024 data, Portland will have fallen behind it in this metric too. So now we know why ADU construction is booming and where it is booming. But let's talk about the pros and cons. I think you understand that one of the biggest pros is that ADUs provide more housing. That's obvious. California has a 2.5 million home shortfall that it needs to cover. It's not building homes fast enough, and the shortfall keeps getting larger. ADUs don't have the advantage of building homes in large numbers all at once like a large apartment tower has, but they can take advantage of other realities of modern-day suburbia. First off, the average cost of a new ADU in California is around $150,000, which is quite low, in part because there are no land acquisition costs. The homeowner already owns the yard, the garage, or the space above the detached garage, or whatever. It's just space often sitting idle, right for new construction. Second, there's a whole lot of that space. In many cities, 90% or more of the space zoned for housing is zoned for single-family housing. But ADUs can be difficult to build if all those lots are small, narrow, or mostly filled with, well, house. But it's quite common for zoning regulations to essentially mandate yards and create perfect spaces for ADUs. Where I live, the zoning code mandates that the footprint of a house cannot exceed 40% of the lot. That leaves 60% of the lot available for development. Now, some of that will likely include a driveway, which is also an important feature for an ADU. But overall, there's a lot of space available. Third, there's a growing industry around constructing ADUs. No longer a niche building type, contractors now know how to build them efficiently and to code, making it a more streamlined process for homeowners. There are even prefab ADUs that can be dropped in on top of a foundation. And magazines like Dwell love to highlight beautiful architect-designed ADUs that probably can't be considered affordable housing, but they do look nice. And even better, we're starting to see lending institutions offering loans directed at ADU construction. Previously, they've been pretty hard to finance and still are in many places. There are some downsides to ADUs, and maybe downsides isn't the right word, but there are issues to be concerned about. And I want to be clear that these issues do not outweigh the pros I just talked about. The first one is that many of these ADU rentals have these small unit mom and pop landlords I talked about earlier. This can be a good thing, as they're often less likely to begin eviction paperwork over one missed payment. Larger property management firms have the staff and expertise to evict more easily. But as a result, ADU landlords are much more picky about who they rent to, which can lead to concerns over discrimination. Larger landlords and property managers can be a little more forgiving up front. The Federal Fair Housing Act applies to ADU renters, but enforcement can be challenging and often depends on the current administration's appetite for doing so. The other issue is affordability. Are ADUs really affordable housing? Well, according to the state of California, 27% of ADUs built in the state are considered affordable. That is better than the 20% of all housing units. That said, due to their smaller size, they aren't great for families or households that consist of roommates living together to split the rent and reduce their housing costs. But one of the fastest growing household types is single women living alone, and ADUs could be a great fit for that demographic, particularly if they are as cute as Pinterest is telling me they are. The impact on neighborhoods is another concern raised around ADUs. While proponents argue that they are perfectly designed to fit in with existing neighborhoods due to their small footprint and low profile in backyards, opponents will say that they bring parking issues, traffic, and noise to otherwise peaceful neighborhoods. Santa Maria, a city of about 110,000 people on California's central coast, has approved over 1,500 ADUs since 2018, landing it in the top 10 for California's cities. This prolific construction has left some residents frustrated over perceived neighborhood impacts. I was actually curious about this, and with the help of some of my students, I did a study on the implications of increasing residential density on parking supply. You'll hear people say that more ADUs mean more people parking on the street, making it harder to find parking. My students and I decided to put that to the test and actually count parked cars. We counted in the early mornings and late in the evening when we figured most people would be home. We then compared the number of cars to the number of spaces that we counted. We also compared counts in low-density neighborhoods with those of moderate-density neighborhoods. The moderate-density neighborhood was a stand-in for a neighborhood that had added a lot of ADUs. What did we find? Well, there's plenty of excess parking in both types of neighborhoods. We never counted more than 50% of the parking spaces occupied, either on-street or in driveways and garages. The problem is that perception is often more important than reality, particularly when it comes to policy and politics. Thus far, that hasn't stopped the California legislature from passing laws, but increased resistance may slow down the steady march of new bills. But what's next for ADUs? Well, first of all, more new bills. Effective January 1st, 2025 in California, people who own unpermitted ADUs have new pathways to make them permitted, including having a confidential third-party contractor inspect the ADU to see if it would be permittable before the homeowner makes the city aware of the unpermitted ADU. This obviously protects the homeowner from the city requiring them to tear it down or pay for expensive retrofits. A new law also allows for up to 8 ADUs on lots with existing multifamily housing. And if the construction of those ADUs results in less parking on site, those parking spaces don't have to be replaced. Another bill requires cities to have pre-approved ADU plans available for homeowners on the city's website. If a homeowner chooses to use those plans, the city must approve the permit within 30 days. Again, California has slowly but surely removed the roadblocks, those red lights, to building ADUs. They've expanded the places they can be built, reduced permit times, and reduced the work required of homeowners to build them. This is why the state now has tens of thousands of ADUs in single-family neighborhoods throughout the state. Other states can learn from California's example. They don't have to pass a couple of bills per year, but can instead consolidate all of those bills into one package and be at the same point California is right now. States like Oregon and Washington are making progress on their own, and with their housing crisis spreading across the United States, I'm sure other states will follow suit. I also want to bring attention to another area of future growth for ADUs. Like I said earlier, a typical ADU in California costs $150,000 to construct. And short of some grant program, that's going to be a permanent barrier for some people. One project a local nonprofit of mine is working on aims to lower costs by avoiding the cost of expensive utility hookups and pouring a foundation slab. It's taking the tiny house concept and making it work as an ADU. They're calling them caretaker cottages, and they have waterless toilets and solar electricity. They're far cheaper to build than a regular ADU, but can still serve as a comfortable living environment for single people who need an affordable roof over their head. I had an opportunity to tour their example cottage a while back, and it's pretty darn nice. The organization who built it, Smart Share Housing Solutions, has successfully campaigned to legalize them in 2 area cities and hopes to do the same in others as well. I think the biggest lesson from the story of ADUs is that when local governments, sometimes at the behest of state governments, loosen their regulations, more housing gets built. It's funny how that works, huh? Fewer regulations around housing means more innovation, more construction, and ultimately more households with a roof over their heads. The issues and concerns I raised don't outweigh the positives, and I hope that they become a common building type across the United States. We have no shortage of backyards waiting for a cute cottage. Thanks so much for watching this to the end. And if you're the kind of person who watches my videos to the end, maybe you'd also like to watch them ad-free and early over on Nebula. I also recently started a Discord group exclusive to Nebula subscribers and Patreon patrons, but you have to sign up to check it out. Ad-free, early, and better access to me. These are the kind of things we could like to do on Nebula. We don't have to worry as much about pleasing the algorithms to get views. We're all about making the platform great for viewers. We use a subscription model that's much more stable and sustainable. A ton of that streaming revenue is going right back to the creators to produce Nebula Originals. I have a whole bunch of Nebula Original content for you to check out, including my Great City series. It profiles some of the most iconic parts of the world's most important cities. I also produced Planning Ancient Rome, a never-before-seen visual history of the ancient city. It's some of my best work because Nebula provides additional resources, and it's only available on that platform. Other great creators are publishing Nebula Originals on the platform as well. The ever-popular travel game Jetlag is still going strong. I highly recommend it. And Nebula is moving on to narrative content as well, so we got you covered with both nonfiction and fiction content. In all, Nebula offers you, the viewer, an ad-free experience filled with videos produced by a curated group of thoughtful YouTubers. And those thoughtful creators are also publishing big-budget, high-quality exclusive content. You can get all of this for a surprisingly affordable price. When you sign up at my link, nebula.tv/citybeautiful, you'll get 40% off an annual subscription. My channel will even get a portion of that subscription fee as long as you stay subscribed, so it's one of the best ways to support me and this channel. Nebula is also offering lifetime memberships for people who want to go above and beyond in their support for the channel and platform. I love that we have a couple of different ways for allowing people to show their support. And if you want to help others support City Beautiful, Nebula now offers gift memberships. It's perfect for a last-minute gift or just for fun. Thanks so much for supporting, and I'll see you on the next video.